Hey, welcome back to Business 163, Personal Finance. And we are now in Module 8, and we are talking about credit and debt. So welcome to Module 8. We're going to be talking about credit cards and auto loans and mortgage loans and the good side of credit and the dangerous side of credit and debt. All of that in this module. And so welcome, and this is, of course, one of the most important modules in this entire class on personal finance, right? This is where many folks, many Americans, many folks from other countries, where you can very easily get yourselves in over your head with all sorts of difficult challenges and long-term consequences. So this is a pretty important module. I would tell you right up front, we will never be able to say everything possible that we could say about credit or debt. This is simply a primer, an introduction to the topic for what is useful for those of us who are working through our personal finances and building up our degree of financial literacy. So, as you can see in this very first title slide, in this very first lecture, we're going to try to answer the question, what are credit and debt? How should we think about these things? How do we define them? What are credit and debt? So let's start out with the first term, credit. What is credit? Well, credit, as the term sort of suggests in just common English, credit is a good thing. I give you credit for something, right? And so in financial terms, what is credit? A credit is when a lender gives you credit for your financial trustworthiness. In other words, the lender trusts that if they provide a loan to you, that you will repay the debt. It is a good thing that an organization, a company, a financial institution gives you credit for your trustworthiness. The lender trusts you. Now, realize that right up front, credit does not necessarily mean that you have a debt, that you have borrowed money. It simply means they trust you to borrow money and pay it back, right? So in that sense, credit is a promise. It doesn't have to be a fulfilled promise, but it's a promise. Credit is a promise to lend you a certain amount of money, trusting you will repay that amount with some interest to pay them for the trouble, to take the risk, according to some certain set of terms and conditions. In other words, it is a promise to lend to you at some time in the future. It is then, credit is a validation of your trustworthiness. That's all a good thing, right? And you should look at it that way, that credit is a good thing. It's also a powerful thing in today's economic world. Let's see if we can give you an example. In business terms, we talk about credit and debt in terms of leverage. Leverage is what we refer to in the business community when a company finances some of their operations, some of their activities with debt. So let me see if I can illustrate the power of leverage, financial leverage, to you. In scenario A, let's say that you're in the business of buying and selling boxes, a box that's in this case worth $10,000. So let's say you have $10,000 in the bank. In scenario A, you buy a box for $10,000 and then you're able to sell it immediately to somebody else for $11,000. That means, of course, you've made a $1,000 profit, and that's pretty easy to understand, right? But scenario B is where I want you to pay close attention. Let's say that you use your $10,000 cash as security to borrow an additional $990,000. Together with your $10,000 security, you now have $1 million. So let's say if each of those boxes costs $10,000, you buy 100 boxes. And that, of course, is worth a total of $1 million. Now you've spent all of your $1 million, the $10,000 you had and the $990,000 you borrowed. You have 100 boxes, which you then are able to immediately sell to others for a total price of $1,100,000. In other words, you make $1,000 on every box that you sell, right? Now, think about this for a moment. You pay back your $990,000 plus $10,000 in interest, and after your initial $10,000 that you put up as security, this leaves you with a $90,000 profit. That's right, if you carefully do the math, in both scenarios you started out with $10,000, but using the power of financial leverage, which also known commonly as debt, you borrowed the money in order to make a substantially greater profit, right? Scenario A, you made $1,000 in profit. Scenario B, you made $90,000 in profit. Now you may be saying, well, wait a minute, you had to take a loan out to do it, so you exposed yourself to all sorts of risk and uncertainty, and that's all very true. But now at least you begin to see the attraction of embracing some debt to make use of the power of financial leverage. In fact, leaving the business world and going back to our personal lives, credit using leverage allows you to buy what you could not really afford if all you were doing was using your cash. You see there the picture of a very nice car and a very nice house, right? Nice homes, luxury cars, all the sorts of things that adds up to, well, a better lifestyle, far better than you might be able to afford with cash alone. That is really the attraction of credit and debt in our world, our society today. You can live a life that's larger and better than what you would otherwise be able to afford with cash alone. So that's sort of the attraction, the upside, if you will, of credit and debt. When we talk about credit, how do we convince a lender that we are trustworthy? Well, commonly we talk about the 5 C's of credit. There are 5 elements or considerations or categories of consideration that a lender will use to assess your trustworthiness and whether or not to award you or issue you credit. You see the 5 C's, they all start with the letter C. The first one is character, which we can essentially summarize or describe quickly as, well, that's your credit history, right? Your character is proven by what have you done in the past. Okay, very quick and easy to understand, right? Your capacity refers to your capacity to repay the loan should you decide to take the loan out, right? And so that's oftentimes measured by the amount of debt relative to the amount of your annual income. Can you afford to make the payments? That's known as a debt-to-income ratio. Third, we have capital. How much money do you already have, and how much money are you willing to put down? For instance, if you're buying a house, are you able to put 10% or 20% down payment? Do you have that money? And of course, if you have money saved in the bank, that makes you much better credit risk because, well, if things get a little difficult for you, at least you have cash reserves and savings to continue to make your monthly payments, right? So those are the first 3 C's: character, capacity, and capital. The 4th C is collateral, and in some cases, you will end up putting up or pledging collateral. What is a collateral? It's an asset that serves as security for the loan. For instance, if you get a mortgage loan, the home in question is the collateral for the loan, which means if you stop paying and you default on the loan, what does the lender do? The lender comes and takes the asset. He forecloses and repossesses the house. He takes the house back as his, right? So with certain types of loans, for instance, an auto loan, the car is the collateral, or with a mortgage loan, right? The home is the collateral. For certain types of loans, right, there is collateral that the lender considers that you will need to pledge as security for the loan. And finally, the 5th C are the conditions of the loan itself. The type of loan, what's its purpose, what's the amount, what's the time period, what's the interest rate, are there fees involved, any other terms, right? Those are the 5 broad categories of considerations a lender will take into account when they're trying to make a judgment, an assessment, whether to approve for instance, a credit application. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about these in later videos, but you need to see them now. And of course, I've also in the module given you some supplemental reading, some articles from some great sources to help explain that even further. All righty. But now that we've considered how a lender assesses whether to issue you credit or not, what really is the root of the danger of taking on debt in our personal financial lives? The real danger rests in the fact that, well, quite frankly, we cannot predict the future. If you take out a loan, if you take out an auto loan, a mortgage loan, or simply charge amounts on your credit cards, credit and debt repayment can work in your life, well, as long as your income remains stable, reliable, and controllable, right? As long as things remain exactly as you count on them to be, well, then you can manage debt repayment. But the big problem is, quite frankly, over the long haul, there is nothing in life that is stable, reliable, or controllable. What happens if, oops, what's that noise under the hood of my car that now unexpectedly is going to cost me several $1,000s to keep the car running? What happens, oops, oh, I was sending my children to private school with tuition and the school has just significantly increased the monthly tuition. Do I take them out of that school, or how am I going to pay for it? Or even worse, right? A medical emergency that results in a hospitalization, lost income that comes from perhaps losing a job or changing jobs. There are just all sorts of things that happen in normal life that we cannot anticipate, we cannot predict the future, and that gives rise to uncertainty. Uncertainty adds risk to our financial life, and that really is, at least from my estimation, the root of the danger of taking on debt, because we can't predict the future. The bottom line then, as we begin to talk about debt and credit in this module, credit can be a wonderful thing in many ways. Credit makes our modern life possible. But let us be perfectly honest. Owing money is a little like being a slave to the lender. You will always owe them that payment every single month until that debt is repaid. So by taking on debt, you are mortgaging your future. In other words, you've already promised away money that, quite frankly, you haven't yet earned yet, right? For instance, if you have a 7-year car loan or, quite frankly, a 30-year mortgage, you have already promised future money to somebody else and you haven't even earned it yet. This can be dangerous, especially because of everything we learned about behavioral finance, right? Remember that module 2? We don't always make logical, objective, emotionless decisions about buying things. I think you see where this is going, right? We are not saying, as some financial gurus might out there in the big bad world, that all debt is always bad. We're not taking that position in this class, in this course. Rather, what we are going to share with you in this module is that credit, managed well, can be a wonderful tool for modern life. It can bring great benefits and opportunities to you, and credit and debt managed poorly can lead to all sorts of not so great long-term consequences. Thus, this module is essential for us to better understand how to manage our personal financial lives. Welcome to Module 8. We'll see you in the next lecture.